Humans and their little trinkets. They're small, insignificant objects they carry across decades like the universe owes them a museum. I have catalogued 17,000 sapient species across 4 galactic arms, and not one of them, not the crystallographers of Thethmora, not the memory singers of the Quellian Drift, hoards sentiment quite like the humans do. They wrap their emotions around objects the way other species wrap wounds. Tight, careful, like if they let go, something bleeds. My name is Vrethox-Siin, designation Tier 4 Cultural Observer for the Galactic Convergence Archival Division, and I was stationed on Earth for what my superiors called a routine observational rotation. 3 of your years. Routine, yes, absolutely. Completely routine. I am still filing the psychological adjustment reports. But this story is not about me. Not entirely. This story is about a human named Dayo, a gift that should not have survived, and a woman named Priya who cried so hard her colleague Basil had to bring her a second cup of tea. We will get to all of that. Trust me. Dayo Adewale was 29 years old when I first observed him. He worked in a mid-tier administrative office in a city called Birmingham, which the humans pronounce confidently, as if naming it after a larger, more important city was a perfectly reasonable choice. He was unremarkable by most biological metrics. Medium height, quiet voice, the kind of human who holds the door open for strangers and then stands there slightly too long wondering if he held it too early. You know the type. Every species has one. But humans have refined this particular brand of anxious politeness into an art form. What made Dayo interesting? What made him worth 3 years of my observational logs? Was what he carried in his coat pocket. Not a weapon, not currency, not even one of those small glowing rectangles they cannot stop staring at. No. Dayo carried a carved wooden figure roughly the size of a human fist, shaped like a seated woman with her hands raised to the sky. The wood was dark and worn smooth from decades of handling. One of the woman's hands had been repaired with a thin line of dried adhesive so old it had gone amber. The base had 3 letters scratched into it with something sharp, M-A-A, and the scratches were so faded they only caught light at certain angles. I scanned it on day 1 of my observation. The wood was West African in origin, carved approximately 41 years prior by hand using traditional tools. Sentimental value, incalculable. Monetary value, negligible. Structural integrity, surprisingly stable for its age, though the adhesive repair suggested at least one catastrophic moment in its history. I flagged it in my reports as object of probable emotional significance. My supervisor, a Quellian named Vethhara, who had the emotional range of a filing cabinet, told me to deprioritize it. It is a trinket, she said. Observe the social hierarchies. Observe the resource allocation patterns. Observe the political anxiety cycles. I observed all of those things, but I kept watching the wooden figure. Dayo never put it on display. He never showed it to colleagues. He never photographed it for his social media presence, which, trust me, is deeply unusual for a human. They photograph everything. Their food, their feet, their moods. A human not photographing a significant object is practically a biological anomaly. And yet the figure stayed in his pocket, silent and private, the way humans keep their most important things, hidden. His office was a floor of 31 employees. I will spare you all of them, but a few matter here. There was Basil Thalil, his closest colleague, who communicated primarily through sarcasm and very strong opinions about tea temperature. A man after my own observational heart. There was Orla Fitzpatrick, the department coordinator, who ran the office like a general running a small, slightly underfunded war. And there was Priya Venkataraman, who had joined the team 8 months before this story takes place, transferred from a regional office in Leeds. Priya was, to use the human phrase, going through it. I am not supposed to assign emotional weighting to observed subjects. My protocols are very clear on this. But Vethhara was not watching the day I logged, in my private notes. This one is tired in a way that sleep will not fix. Priya had lost her mother 11 months prior. She had returned to work too early because she could not afford not to. She smiled at the right moments, answered emails promptly, brought her lunch in a blue container every single day, and carried herself with the particular dignity of someone who has decided that falling apart is simply not scheduled for right now. Basil knew. Orla probably suspected. Dayo knew, because Dayo noticed things quietly, the way certain humans do, not with great announcement but with small, consistent attention. He noticed when Priya's blue container sat unopened until 3 in the afternoon. He noticed when she went to the car park on her lunch break and came back with slightly red eyes and perfectly reapplied composure. He did not say anything dramatic. He started leaving a cup of tea on her desk at 2:15 every afternoon, just there, just present, with no note and no expectation. That was Dayo. Now, the day this story actually pivots, because every HFY story has a pivot, and I have seen enough of them to know they rarely announce themselves, was a Thursday in late October. The office was celebrating something called a work anniversary, which is exactly what it sounds like. Orla had acquired cake. There were small paper plates. Basil was already critiquing the cake's structural integrity. The occasion was for a man named Pietros Anagnosto, who was completing 15 years with the company and seemed genuinely, slightly tearfully honored by the whole thing, which I found unexpectedly moving, and then immediately filed a note reminding myself to recalibrate my emotional neutrality protocols. During the small celebration, someone, I believe it was a junior analyst named Corinne Mbatha, asked the group if anyone had something they had kept for a long time. A sentimental object. She had been telling a story about her grandmother's recipe book, and it had prompted the question naturally, the way human conversations spiral outward from one warm thing to several warm things, like a fire being fed. People shared things. A watch, a photograph on a phone. Pietros produced, to general delighted surprise, a keychain he had been given on his first day at the company 15 years ago. There was laughter, there was cake eating, and then Corinne looked at Dayo and said, "What about you? You always seem like a man with a story." Dayo looked up. He had that expression humans get when they are deciding something quickly, in the space of a breath, before language catches up with the decision. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached into his coat pocket. He set the wooden figure on the table. The room did not go quiet dramatically. It went quiet gradually, the way attention shifts, people noticing others noticing. Basil put down his fork. Orla leaned forward slightly. Priya, who had been standing at the edge of the group, looked at the figure the way you look at something that reminds you of something you cannot quite name. "My grandmother carved it," Dayo said. His voice was even, controlled. The voice of a man who has told himself the shape of this story many times, but not the weight of it. "She made it when my mother was born. It was supposed to be my mother." The figure, hands up like she was giving something to the sky or receiving it. "My grandmother was never totally clear." A small pause. "She gave it to my mother. My mother gave it to me the morning I left Nigeria to come here. I was 8 years old. 21 years. He had carried it for 21 years. Corinne said, very softly, "Oh, Dayo." "It broke once," he continued, turning it over in his hands with the ease of someone who has done this 10,000 times. "On the flight over. My bag was checked wrong and it got crushed a bit. This hand here." He indicated the repaired join. "I was 8, and I cried for about 2 hours, and then a flight attendant gave me peanuts, and somehow that helped, the way things help when you are 8. The group laughed, softly, warmly. That particular human laughter that is not really about finding something funny but about recognizing something true. "My mother passed 4 years ago," Dayo said. And the room did that thing again. The gradual quiet. "But I have this," and sometimes that is the whole argument, right? That things survive. That you can carry something across 20 years and an ocean and a broken bag claim and it is still here. He smiled, small and steady. Still here. I was monitoring Priya's biometrics, standard observational protocol, I want to be clear. Very professional, completely scientific. Her heart rate had been climbing for approximately 90 seconds. Her respiratory pattern had shifted. When Dayo said still here, her threshold simply exceeded itself. She did not break down. That is not the right phrase for what Priya did. She did not break. She released. Quietly, with both hands pressed briefly to her face, with a breath that was half laugh and half something that had been waiting 11 months to be exhaled. Basil was beside her in approximately 4 seconds with a fresh cup of tea, because Basil had been watching too, because the people in this room were, despite everything, despite the administrative work and the paper plates and the 15-year keychains, paying attention to each other. Sorry, Priya said, not quite managing steady. Sorry, that's my mum, she had things like that, objects she carried. I never understood why, when I was young, why you would weigh yourself down with things. And then, she stopped, started again, and then I would give anything for one of them now? Dayo looked at her for a long moment. Then he held out the figure, not permanently, not as a grand gesture. He held it out the way you hand someone something to look at, to hold, to feel the weight of an offering, not a surrender. Priya took it with both hands. She turned it over slowly, and her fingers found the faded letters on the base, and she traced them without asking, because humans understand instinctively that some letters are not meant to be read aloud. M-A-A, Dayo said quietly. It means mother, in Yoruba, and Priya, who had been holding herself together for 11 months with both hands and a blue lunchbox and a very disciplined schedule, Priya could not hold back tears. I filed 16 pages of observational notes that afternoon. Vrethox-Siin told me I had over-prioritized a sentimental event. I told her she was wrong. I want to be clear about something before we continue. I am a Tier 4 cultural observer. I have documented species that communicate through bioluminescent skin patterns. I have cataloged civilizations that process grief through communal sonic frequencies lasting 72 hours. I have watched a species on the far side of the Vethmora cluster dissolve their dead into a shared memory pool, and then collectively sing about it for a decade. I have seen grief in 43 documented forms across the known galaxy. None of it looked quite like Priya Venkataraman standing in a Birmingham office, holding a carved wooden figure that belonged to someone else's mother, crying for her own. Grief is one of those things that most species try to systematize. The Quellians have a 17-stage processing protocol. The HFY build physical monuments and then, once the monument is complete, they are considered done, grief concluded, case closed, move along. Very efficient, very tidy, completely inadequate in my professional opinion. But nobody asked me. Humans do not systematize it, they carry it. In their bodies, in their habits, in the objects they cannot bring themselves to put down. And occasionally, without warning, in a room with paper cake plates and a 15-year keychain, someone else's object reaches across the air and finds the exact shape of what you have been missing, and something in you simply opens. I am getting ahead of myself. Let us return to the room. Priya held the figure for perhaps 40 seconds. Then she returned it to Dayo with both hands, carefully, the way you return something borrowed that you understand the value of. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. Basil handed her the tea. She took it. She laughed once, short and slightly embarrassed. The kind of laugh that means I did not plan to do that in front of everyone. Thank you, she said to Dayo, for showing us. Thank you for holding her, Dayo said. Which was a sentence I spent 3 days analyzing and eventually filed under. Human language operating above its stated bandwidth. The celebration wound down. Cake was finished. Pietros looked slightly overwhelmed in the best way. Corinne packed up the remaining plates with the efficiency of someone who has cleaned up after many office events and has made peace with it. The afternoon resumed its administrative rhythm, but something had shifted. I noted it in my logs. Group emotional cohesion, elevated. Cross-individual empathy index, recalibrated. Priya Venkataraman grief isolation index, reduced by a measurable margin. In plain language, the room knew her now, and she knew she was known. And that is sometimes all the movement grief requires to begin going somewhere new. What I did not anticipate, and I want to note for the record, that I flagged this gap in my own predictive modeling, was what happened 3 weeks later. Dayo arrived at his desk on a Tuesday morning to find a small parcel on his keyboard, wrapped in brown paper, tied with kitchen string, with his name written on it in handwriting that leaned slightly left, the way handwriting does when someone is left-handed but was taught to write right-handed as a child and never fully resolved the conflict. I identified the handwriting as Priya's within 0.4 seconds. I am very good at my job. He opened it at his desk, slowly, with the careful attention of someone who has learned that small packages can contain very large things. Inside was a photograph, printed on proper photo paper, not just office paper, which told me Priya had gone somewhere specifically to have this printed, which told me this had required effort and intention, and therefore meant more than a casual gesture. The photograph showed a woman in a bright yellow sari, laughing at something off-camera, her head tilted back, her hands mid-gesture, the way hands look when someone is in the middle of telling a story they love. Priya's mother. I cross-referenced her social media archive and confirmed it within 1.2 seconds. Still very good at my job. On the back of the photograph, Priya had written, "She also carried things. A small brass elephant, about this big, from her own mother. She carried it every day. I do not know where it went, but I thought you should know there are others like yours out in the world. Still here, she had used his words, returned them to him, shaped into something new. Humans do that, take language and hand it back, altered, the way you might return a borrowed coat with a note sewn into the lining. Dayo sat at his desk for a long moment. Then he placed the photograph carefully inside his coat, not in his bag, not in his drawer, in his coat, the same place he kept the figure. I noted this extensively. Vrethox-Siin would have told me to stop. I noted it anyway. Basil, who had witnessed the whole quiet transaction from 2 desks over, said nothing for approximately 4 minutes. Then he stood up, walked to the kitchen, and returned with 3 cups of tea, placing one in front of Dayo, one in front of Priya, and one in front of himself, and sat back down without a single word. Just tea, just presence. I have observed a lot of species. I have never encountered one that uses hot liquid as a primary bonding mechanism quite the way humans do. It is remarkable. It is absurd. It is, I will admit, in a section of my notes I have password protected from Vrethox-Siin. Genuinely beautiful. Now, here is where the story does the thing HFY stories do. And I need you to understand that I did not engineer this moment. I simply observed it. I am a scientist. I report what I see. 6 weeks after the office celebration, the Galactic Convergence sent a revised assessment team to evaluate humanity's potential candidacy for what we call First Contact Preliminary Review. A process so bureaucratically laborious that most species have either dissolved or significantly evolved by the time it concludes. The assessment criteria include cognitive complexity, social cohesion capacity, evidence of multi-generational cultural continuity, and what our most recent framework update calls resilience under continuous loss, which is the technical way of saying, what does a species do when life keeps taking things from it? I submitted my observational reports as part of the standard evidence package, all 16 volumes of them, including, over Vrethox-Siin's considerable objections, the 47 pages dedicated to a carved wooden figure, a yellow sari photograph, and 3 cups of tea on a Tuesday morning. The lead assessor was a being called Vrethox-Siin, who had been conducting first contact preliminary reviews for longer than most of my species had been sentient, and who regarded my reports with the expression of someone opening a package they expected to contain a standard form and finding instead a live creature that immediately climbed up their arm. "You have filed," Vrethox-Siin said, with the tone of someone reading an unusual tax declaration. 47 pages on an object carried in a coat pocket. 47 and a half, I said. The last section runs a bit long. The object, Vrethox-Siin continued, is of negligible monetary value, no strategic significance, no technological relevance, and is structurally repaired with what you describe as amber-colored adhesive. Correct. And you consider this relevant to the resilience under continuous loss assessment. I consider it the entire argument, I said. Which was, I realized after I said it, almost exactly what Dayo had said on that Thursday afternoon about carrying something across 20 years and an ocean. I chose not to flag this coincidence. Some things you just let land. Vrethox-Siin reviewed my reports for 2 days, 2 full days, which in convergence assessment terms is practically unheard of. They usually skim. They have seen a lot of species. Skimming is how you survive the volume. On the 3rd day, Vrethox-Siin called me in and said, in the measured tone of someone who has decided something they did not fully expect to decide, "The humans are anomalous." Yes, I said. They have experienced continuous catastrophic loss at both individual and civilizational scale. And instead of developing collective trauma suppression protocols, they have developed a pause. Object-based grief transmission systems. They encode loss into physical items and pass them between individuals as a form of shared emotional load-bearing. Yes, I said again. The carved figure moved through 4 generations in 41 years, survived an intercontinental relocation and physical damage, maintained its symbolic function, and then spontaneously triggered an emotional processing event in an unrelated individual who used it to partially resolve an 11-month grief accumulation. Another pause. That is not something we have a category for. I know, I said. I checked. What happened next is still technically under convergence review, so I cannot give you full details. What I can tell you is that Vrethox-Siin's preliminary report used the phrase demonstrably sophisticated resilience architecture in reference to a system that is, at its core, people handing each other worn wooden figures and old photographs and cups of tea. The bureaucratic machinery of the galaxy's oldest interstellar institution, generating 17 pages of formal language to describe what Dayo and Priya and Basel had done naturally, without protocol, without prompting, on a Thursday afternoon with leftover birthday cake. I found this very funny. I laughed for what my species considers an inappropriately long time. I have no regrets. I left Earth 8 months after that assessment, reassigned to a monitoring post in the outer HFY cluster, which is considerably less interesting and smells aggressively of their grief monuments. Before I departed, I did something that is technically outside observational protocol, and which I have not included in any official report, and which I am telling you about now because this is not an official report. This is a story. I left an anonymous note in Dayo's building. Not in his office. I am not reckless. In the public foyer, tucked under the reception desk where the human who worked mornings would find it, and, based on her established behavioral patterns, pass it around to see if anyone claimed it. The note said, in plain English, "The thing you carry, it has been documented. It matters more than you know." Dayo never knew it was from me. As far as he is concerned, it was a strange anonymous note that his receptionist Ifioma found on a Wednesday and pinned to the notice board, and that no one ever claimed. I checked, months later, through secondary observational channels. The note stayed on that board for 11 weeks before the board was refreshed. 11 weeks. I do not know if Dayo read it more than once. I suspect he did. I know Priya read it. I know because Basel mentioned it to her on a Thursday afternoon, right around 2:15, while placing a cup of tea on her desk, and she looked at it for a long time with the expression of someone deciding whether to believe something they want to be true. Then she looked at the window. Then she smiled. Not the polished, scheduled smile. The other one. The one that means, something I lost is still, in some form, somewhere, counting, still here. I am Vrethox-Siin, Tier 4 cultural observer, and I have catalogued 17,000 sapient species across 4 galactic arms. I have watched civilizations rise and dissolve and be filed and archived and occasionally mourned in the footnotes of convergence assessment documents. I have seen grief systematized and ritualized and processed and sung and built into monuments and dissolved into shared memory pools. And I have seen a man reach into his coat pocket in a Birmingham office and place a worn wooden figure on a table. And I can tell you, with full professional confidence, that I have never once filed 47.5 pages on a monument. Some species build for permanence. Humans carry it, in their pockets, in their coats, across oceans and decades and broken bag claims. They hand it to strangers at the right moment. They give it back, and it means more than it did before. I do not have a pocket. My species has no concept of the coat. But if I did, if I could, I think I would carry something too.